Hello, everybody. We're live. The Duran Live 35. How's everyone doing out there? If you can hear me okay, let me know in the chat. Sorry to keep you guys waiting. All right. Hi, Alex from Nairobi, Kenya. Great. If you guys can hear me and the sound is good, let me know. Greetings from Texas. Okay, loud and clear, Valley. Yes, thank you, Valley. American Rebel. Thank you, American Rebel. Matt, sound is good. Phoenix, perfect, great. Voice IP001, great, thank you. Okay, great. Hi from St. Lucia. All right, we are live, everybody. And we have with us today on the Duran Live 35, we have in Moscow, the legend, the myth, the host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how are you doing today?
Check it out. Short sleeves, first day. Spring's here.
All right, guys, can you hear Peter okay?
And everyone's in a good mood because in Russia, there's a sense of euphoria when finally the winter's over. So it's an upbeat place right now.
All right, great. Great to hear. If you hear Peter all right, let us know as well in the chat. Hello from Canada, from Melbourne, from Lagos, Yorkshire, Sweden in the house. Adam, how you doing, Adam? Hi, Peter. Hi, Alexander from Noreen. All right, Valley S says she hears you well, Peter. Matt DeVries says he also hears you really good, Peter, as well. Great. Thank you, guys. And we have in London, the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how are you doing today?
I'm doing splendidly well, and the weather here is glorious. We have bright, bright sun, and it's very hot by London standards. It's over 20 degrees, so that by our standards is very hot. So we're enjoying the sun. We don't get as cold as it gets in Russia, but we get even less sun than in Moscow during the winter. It's usually dark and overcast. So we're all enjoying the sun here. And if you go into the parks, you'll see lots of people sunbathing and enjoying themselves. Okay, great. If you guys hear Alexander all right, let us know as well. Truth is everything. Love from Mykonos. It's cold and windy here in Mykonos, Alexander. That's from Truth is Everything. Mykonos is always windy. All right. Yeah, that's true. Hello from Thailand. Guys, we're sorry for the delay. Alexander is joining us via mobile. Peter is also on mobile. Google Hangouts gives us a little bit of a problem for all three of us to hear each other. It's really strange. Really but weird. One day we're trying to sort it out every week. Yeah. It always gives us a problem. And I can't hear Alexander. Alexander can't hear me. Alexander can hear Peter, but can't hear me. It's all kind of weirdness. But anyway, we'll figure it out one day.
So, well, one day soon.
One day soon, because it's completely bizarre. When there's two people, it's fine. When there's three people or four people, it just doesn't work. You would figure with all those billions, Google would be able to create a program that just, is fail safe. But anyway. All right, guys. Elections. We are talking about elections today. We had elections in Ukraine yesterday. Big change. Alexander, I think you said that you'll be happy to see the backside of Poroshenko as he leaves through the door.
Well, apparently 75% of Ukrainians feel the same way. Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. So Alexander, let's start it off with Ukraine, the elections that happened yesterday, Sunday evening, with Zielinski, the TV comedian who is now president of Ukraine. What do you make of it, Alexander? Well, I think it is a damning indictment on Poroshenko, on the whole Maidan coup or revolution, as some people still persist in calling it, and of course on Western policy, which has been unstinting in support for Poroshenko. And as Peter correctly says, 75% of Ukrainians have delivered an absolutely damning verdict on Poroshenko, on his time as president, on the disaster that he has wreaked to Ukraine during that time, the awful war that was lost, economic crisis, which has never really abated, despite some claims that you sometimes hear, corruption, which is worse than it was before the coup, all absolutely terrible. And it seems to me that it says absolutely everything about this ghastly situation, that 75% of Ukrainians who voted preferred a TV comedian to Poroshenko. I mean, you could not get a more comprehensive indictment
on the part of the Ukrainian people, not just of Poroshenko, but of their entire governing class, that they've stepped outside it and gone in such overwhelming numbers in the biggest landslide victory Ukraine has ever had in its post-independence history, for somebody who is not just a complete outsider, but who is actually a jokester, a comedian, an entertainer, someone no one could possibly take seriously, and yet they prefer a person like that to not just to their sitting president, but to anyone else who has any kind of political background in Ukraine at all. I mean, what does that say about the state of the country?
Peter, what does that say about the state of the country?
Well, I think before I get to that point, I think it's really interesting to point out is that when you look at the post-Soviet space, incumbents have enormous resources, administrative resources are what they're called. I mean, the fact that he got 25%, well, what administrative resources did he use to get that 25%? It could have been, his electoral failure could have been even greater. What I'm saying is that, the election commissions who counts it, this is all determined by the state, okay? So I think that adds to the humiliation of Poroshenko. We didn't have American senators and undersecretary of states going to the Maidan, supporting him. The West had essentially just soured on him, except for the neocons in Western capitals. They probably told him, hit the nationalist card, hit the anti-Russia card, a pro-Ukrainian Orthodox Church. That's a ticket to win. No, that was wrong on every single account. There was nothing positive about Poroshenko's message. As a matter of fact, it focused only on the negatives and the fact that your disposable income is virtually non-existent. And the IMF continues to hammer away at reforms where the rich do not have to pay, but the poor have to pay. So, this is the worst of all possible worlds. And that's why they elected a joke. Now, what does this all mean? It means that this is certainly a lack of approval on what's happened in the post-Maidan time. So over the last 5 years, Poroshenko was not able to create any kind of popular base that it was his, okay, because essentially he was given the presidency. Another thing that tells us is that the power of oligarchy remains hip deep in that country. And they're stuffing their pockets more than ever before. And again, this is why Zielinski, who plays as a comedian as president of Ukraine. That transcends even Trump. Okay. What is interesting to me, Zelensky won because he didn't stand for anything. Poroshenko lost because he stood for the wrong things that did not interest people. Yeah. Now, there's questions about Zelensky's ties to Kolomoyskiy, one of the most powerful oligarchs in Ukraine, intensely corrupt. These people have been around since the independence of Ukraine in 1991. They have not added to Ukraine whatsoever, except for enriching themselves and in snarling the Trump orbit. A lot of people have got to be regretting that they ever did any business in Ukraine, because when you do business in Ukraine, it's all tainted, all right? Very, very deep corruption. So Zelensky, he's a blank page. So what is he going to be the author of his presidency, or is it an open page for other people to write on? We will see. Look, this is like a Trump-like moment, people just rejecting the establishment. But the day he is sworn in as president, these are very real problems, and he's not given any indication whatsoever what he's going to do. Is a state function, the functions of the state behind him? Meaning, are people going to listen to what he says? Okay. He doesn't, we have parliamentary elections in 6 months. He might be able to build a base there. We don't know. Will people sour on him in 6 months' time? We don't know. So this is a scathing indictment of the last 5 years of what's gone wrong. But there's no program of where to go from here. And that's why, I'm glad to see the backside of Poroshenko, but the Ukraine's future is just as murky as ever before, if not more so.
All right, let's get to some super chats on Ukraine. This is from Penguins fan Alexander. So this comedian won in Ukraine. Will the relationship with Russia get better, and how will the West react, especially Canada and the US?
Right, on the first question, I don't think anybody knows. I was listening very carefully to Zelensky's comments after he won, and I have to say I couldn't make any sense of any kind of policy at all. He talks about ending the war, but it's completely unclear how he's going to do that. He talks about talking to the Russians, but he doesn't give any indication that he's prepared to make any kind of meaningful negotiations or concessions to them. He talks about revitalizing the Minsk agreements, but at the same time he rules out decentralization or federalization, which is ultimately what the Minsk agreements were all about. So it's a mass of contradictions. And I have to say, I'm prepared to give him, let's put it like this, the benefit of the doubt for a little while. But I'm far from convinced that he has any real project behind him, any real plan of what to do. And I don't think anyone else in Ukraine who is in a position to implement any kind of project, it actually has it either. I think Peter's absolutely right. I think Ukraine is in a trap, which it can't really escape. It's got itself caught between Russia and the West. Largely, I mean, in large measure, we blame the West for a lot of this, but we mustn't forget that a lot of Ukrainians have themselves created this situation by their extremely bad maneuvering and their refusal to understand certain essential realities about Ukraine's situation. So I think Ukraine is in a trap. I don't see Zelensky leading it out of that trap. And I don't know that the Russians have any expectations that he will. In fact, their comments suggest to me very strongly that they have no expectations of him at all. And as for the Western powers, I don't think they're happy about this because from their point of view, they've lost Poroshenko, who was very much a very reliable figure in promoting the kind of agenda that they were promoting. But I suspect that some of the more, shall we say, skeptical people in the West, especially in countries like Germany and Italy, perhaps even some people in France, are now asking themselves increasingly the question, was this whole Ukrainian adventure ever worth it? I mean, we supported a regime change operation in Ukraine in 2014. We've paid vast amounts of money to try to achieve it. We've wrecked our relations with Russia. And what have we got? In Peter's words, a joke. I mean, it doesn't look to me like a very profitable investment if one uses those sort of strict commercial terms. And I'm pretty sure that there are quite a few people, especially as I said in Germany, but also in other places, who are asking those questions increasingly now.
The interesting thing is that when he was asked, and if he ever gave an answer, his enthusiasm for European Union integration seems to be tepid. His enthusiasm for NATO membership is kind of tepid. I mean, as a juxtaposition to Poroshenko. Okay, let's look at maybe some of the positive things here. Zelensky is really of the people. Okay, maybe he's in high society with media. I mean, and people know him because he's on TV. But I mean, he is closer to the average Ukrainian, and I would imagine he understands the needs of average Ukrainians. I mean, Kolomoyskiy, has a sway over very important sectors of the economy, and he lives in Israel. He doesn't have whatever happens to Ukraine doesn't impact him at all. All right. Also, until we find out more about the Kolomoyskiy connection, Zelensky doesn't really owe anybody anything, and he's the first political figure in Ukrainian post-Soviet history that really comes with no baggage. I mean, for the first 6 months, I'll give him that. That's what maybe worked for him. Now, as far as the Russians are going to be very, very circumspect to see where this goes. Russia's position always has been, he said, they will reach out the hand of conciliation and compromise if the other side reaches out theirs. Well, Poroshenko refused ever to do that, and 13,000 people are dead in the Donbass. And Crimea is lost forever. No politician in Ukraine can say that Crimea is gone, even though they may know it in their head and their heart. But you can't say it. You just can't say it. So there's the Normandy format also that he has mentioned during his campaign, which is kind of a dead end because Poroshenko and his ilk just said it's null and void, though it's still in existence. So there are formats. The Minsk Accord, as Alexander Mercouris pointed out. I mean, they're there. It just will Zelensky want to sit at the table because the table has been vacant for a long time.
All right, Peter, we have a super chat from Fred Byland. Is it a defeat for Clinton and the U.S. and does Kolomoyskiy for Russia or the EU? So it kind of follows through on what you were previously stating about Zelensky.
Well, I mean, for Clinton, I mean, there's so many other things to go after her on. I mean, for sure.
Newland, Clinton, Biden, all these guys, yeah.
Yeah, but these people never say sorry. Okay, it depends on how far A.G. Barr and Lindsey Graham and people like that, how far they want to dig, because you have Biden's son Hunter, which within weeks was sitting on the board of one of Ukraine's most important energy companies. There's been talk of very large financial transactions that were going on. I mean, you had a lot of Americans and Europeans with American passports and European Union passports that were initially was in Poroshenko's government. So, and most of them quit because it was inefficient and it was corrupt. Okay, so we know that that is out there. The Ukrainians, because of of Russiagate and the fact that the Trump camp realized that Ukraine was playing against the Trump campaign. They want to kiss the ring now because they see that they're vulnerable. They back the wrong side or they expose themselves too much. So yeah, I mean, Ukraine is it's the definition of corruption, and these Western political elites that dove in and looking for a payday. It all sticks to them because it's dirty money. How much we'll really know about that, I don't know. I mean, I think A.G. Barr and the other investigations, in their mind, they have bigger fish to fry. Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Jim Comey, Clapper, and all these people. I mean, those are the big fish. The shenanigans played out in Ukraine may not be very high on the list, though it is financial fraud for sure.
Alexander, we've done a show on what was happening in Ukraine. Actually, I think we've done a couple of shows. Get into it a little bit as to what Biden, Hunter Biden, Manafort, all these guys were up to in Ukraine, because as we've said many times amongst the three of us, as well as during our show, there is a money trail. There is real evidence of election meddling, and it's on the side of the Democrats, the DNC, the Podestas, Manafort, who was not working for Putin, but was working to get Ukraine into the EU. And of course, you have Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. And I believe, Peter, we spoke the other day before we did a show, and I think you mentioned that Biden might be announcing his run for the presidency for 2020 any day now. So this could morph into a very big story if people like John Solomon, Sarah Carter, and these guys really dig into it.
Oh, it's a big story. It's a big story if they want to dig into it. Absolutely.
They want to dig into it, yeah.
Yeah.
Alexander.
I'm convinced that John Solomon and Sarah Carter will dig into it. The question is not whether they will dig into it, it's whether people like Fox take it up. I mean, what happened in Ukraine? I think it's now becoming completely clear what was happening in Ukraine. Obviously, there was an overarching geopolitical play. People like Zielinski wanting to separate Ukraine from Russia because of their calculation, or rather their miscalculation, that without Ukraine, Russia would cease to be a great power. So there's always that overarching idea. But it's also clear that a whole group of, I would call them frankly carpetbaggers, corrupt people from the United States went to Ukraine, probably going back quite a long way, deep into the 90s and thereafter, making very large amounts of money by associating with all sorts of corrupt people, benefiting from that corruption, making sure that the money flowed into the Ukraine from the IMF, from the EU, from all these institutions that poured money in. And just as happened in Russia in the 1990s, the money goes in, the money goes out, and it goes into people like Manafort, who we know was, buying ostrich leather coats and all the rest, and of course the Podestas, and dare I say it, Hunter Biden, who gets a nice cushy job in a Ukrainian company. So they're all doing very well. And at the same time, obviously, the one thing these people do not want under any circumstances is a situation where a proper government is restored to Ukraine, as it was in Russia in the 2000s, or where Russian influence grows in Ukraine, because, of course, that puts in jeopardy this very nice little racket that they've organized for themselves there. So you have all these things going on at the same time. On the one hand, there's the geopolitical play. On the other hand, there's the confluence of interests between the oligarchs, the actual Ukrainian oligarchs, who are terrified of a restoration of a proper functioning government in Ukraine, or of an extension of Russian influence in Ukraine, which will jeopardize their position. And you have all these, as I said, carpetbaggers and people like that from the United States concerned about the same thing. And so, of course, they staged this coup in 2014, getting behind them all the backing of the United States, of the European Union. They manipulate all these Nazi and neo-Nazi elements in Ukraine to achieve it. And of course, they perpetuate a chaos which in Ukraine, which suits them very well, because that's how they enrich themselves. And at the same time, they make sure that all that influence is used, all that money and all that influence pouring out of Ukraine is then used to keep the other side of this sort of, bridge across which the money is flowing stable, by trying to make sure that there is a sympathetic government in Washington which won't investigate all these things. And that's where I think all the backing for Hillary Clinton came from. So you have what looks to me, I mean, it has all the appearances of this very, very sinister nexus of illicit money and illicit power, with money moving back from the West into Ukraine, swirling out of Ukraine back to Washington, and being used in Washington to buy influence and to help win elections there. So it's a dark tale. And as I said, it cries out for proper investigation, firstly by people like Sarah Carter and by John Hill and by others, but of course also by proper people in mainstream media, possibly Fox News. But ultimately, it requires a proper criminal investigation too.
I think what when we talk about maybe Zielinski wanting to reach out to Russia, we have to really have the low expectations. I mean, the most important trade links Ukraine and Russia had prior to Maidan have been severed, and there's no indication the Russians will reverse gear and go back. I mean, I'm talking about arms industry, metallurgy, companies in the energy sector. It was quite a few, but the Russians have left because they're not welcomed, and incomes. It's export substitution. I mean, the Russians say, we don't need it, we'll make it ourselves. Okay, so there's not going to be a pouring of money going from Russia into Ukraine, no matter, virtually no matter what happens here. I mean, they're going, what they're going to be looking at is the Russia's commitment to the people of Donbass. The Russian government has made it very clear that the Donbass will not fall. Okay, that's not enough for a lot of people in Russia. A lot of people think that the Russian government doesn't do enough for the Donbass. There are still calls for Russia to recognize them as independent states. I don't think that's in the cards right now. It's possible if Zelensky goes down the path of Poroshenko and others. And Zelensky's going to have to worry about Prava Sector and all these other groups. These people, they still want the revolution to go on. And Zelensky is saying it's over. He's going to have to contend with those people, okay? Because these right-wing neo-Nazi militias are embedded in the security forces, embedded in the military. That's why I go back to my original answer. Will Zelensky have the tools of state to be able to govern? Because there are members that Ukraine's own deep state will just say no. Okay, so we have to keep a close eye on this. Okay, the exhilaration of seeing the backside of Poroshenko has come and gone. Now there's so much more uncertainty as we move forward.
Alexander, before you jump in, can you also answer a question on this point? You can jump in on Peter's as well. It comes from Simon. How do you think Zelensky's going to handle Nord Stream 2?
Well, I think Zelensky's not going to be able to handle Nord Stream 2 because it's not up to him. I mean, the Russians and the Germans have made absolutely clear that they're going to press on with it. And any idea that Zelensky can stop it, I think is delusional. I hope he understands that. Now, what Peter was talking about, the economic links having been broken, not only have they been broken, but the Russians over the last few months, in response to some of the very aggressive moves that the Ukrainian side under Poroshenko's presidency was taking, have actually tightened things further. They're starting to actually wind down on oil deliveries, for example, to Ukraine, which is going to make lots of problems for Ukraine. And there is this notion that the Russians are going to continue to pipe gas through Ukraine, even though in much smaller quantities after Nord Stream 2 is built. I'm going to be straightforward about this. I don't think that's going to happen. I think there will be a period of time when they will no doubt do that, simply because they want to give the Germans, a get-out clause. But as soon as Nord Stream 2 is up and running, and as soon as Turk Stream and its other interconnected pipelines is also up and running, they not only won't need Ukraine anymore, they will decide they don't want Ukraine anymore as a transit state. Yeah. So unless there is a radical change of policy in Ukraine, which the Russians have confidence is going to stick, I don't see the Russians actually coming to Ukraine's rescue. No. Can I just make a few points? I mean, we did a video, Alex and I, a little while ago, just a few days ago it came out, about the aerospace industries around the world. And I talked about how the Russian aerospace industry was reviving. Well, of course, people don't. What we didn't talk about in that video was that one of the reasons it took a little longer to revive than it should have done was that during the Soviet period, Soviet aircraft engine production was concentrated in Ukraine, in a town called Zaporozhets. And that was the place where the Russians used to buy their high bypass turbofan engines for their big aircraft, like the Antonov 124. And it was also the same factory that provided the marine turbines for their warships. And what always used to happen was, there used to be a friendly government, or what the Russians used to perceive as a friendly government with Ukraine for a short time, and the commercial links would continue. They'd be able to import for engines from there. And then, of course, Ukraine would reverse, and that would stop. Now, what happened after 2014 is that the Russians said to themselves, look, enough's enough. We clearly can't count on the Ukrainians anymore. So we've got to start from scratch. We're not going to import any of these engines. We're going to design them ourselves and build them ourselves. And that's what they are now doing. And they're leapfrogging the technology of the Ukrainian industry, which is, of course, still locked into the technologies of the 1980s. It's been barely updated since then. So from the Russian point of view, there is no economic incentive anyway to reestablish those economic links. And even if there was, we've now reached the point where they just don't trust the Ukrainians.
That's right.
I mean, there's almost nothing, I think, the Ukrainians can now do that will persuade the Russians to trust them. So as I said, these changes that Peter was talking about are going to grow and accelerate almost regardless of what Ukraine does.
All right, Peter, there's a super chat from Paul S. on Ukraine. If the Russians really wanted to put Ukraine back in their orbit, they would take out Zelensky before he takes power and blame it on the CIA. But Peter, more to the point, on this super chat, more to the point, the Russians really have taken, outside of the Donbass and Crimea, I mean, all through these years, the Russians have taken a hands-off approach on Ukraine, a much more diplomatic approach with Ukraine, contrary to what the narrative is in the mainstream media and the Western mainstream media.
Okay, I really, really don't like these terms, get Ukraine back into Russia's orbit. I think that's a very arcane way of looking at it. What Russia wants is doesn't want to have a hostile power on its border.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, fine. At the end of the day, if the Ukrainian people don't have any great friendship with the Russian people, well, then fine. Okay? But stop killing ethnic Russians in the Donbass. All right? You know, Ukraine has made all of these decisions on its own. You know, Yanukovych was a completely inept politician trying to maneuver between the Russia and the European Union, and look what he got. He got the ultimate dumpster fire. He was almost killed, threw the country into turmoil. Russia didn't do that. It didn't do that at all. Russia wants to have a stable, quiet, even prosperous Ukraine. It obviously doesn't want Ukraine to be part of NATO. Why would it? Russia has its own national security interests. It doesn't need a hostile alliance. You know, they can strike with a missile, ground-to-air missile, from the Ukrainian border to the Kremlin. That is like a minute and a half. Okay. It cannot tolerate that. Okay, it is an existential threat. But pulling Ukraine back into Russia's orbit, you know, I think that's playing into a Western narrative here. Okay.
Yes.
You know, as I've said for years and years, the Russians and the Ukrainians have lived right next to each other for hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay, it's a mixture of people. You know, Russian culture, Russian religion, Orthodox Church, it permeates way into Ukraine, okay? So, you know, I understand, you know, we have borders, we have national interests, that's all nice and fine. But Russia is not interested in having countries in its orbit because, well, that might mean taking responsibility for their irresponsibility. And as we've been saying in this podcast, Russia doesn't want to have anything to do with it. It wants to take care of itself at home, its own people. But having ethnic Russians killed by artillery, by the Ukrainian army, firing on the Donbass, that is intolerable. And that is why Russia stepped up and said, we will not make sure these people do not fall, and meaning fall to ethnic cleansing, because there are elements in Ukraine right now that would love to do it if they had the opportunity. And the Ukrainian army, under Poroshenko, humiliated itself. It's attacking the Donbass because the Donbass they have their own identity, they have their own interests, they have agency, and they fought back. Okay, Russia, one way or another, in many indirect ways, made sure that they could protect themselves. So it's stop the word orbit, okay? Because that's not what Russia is interested in. What countries are in Russia's orbit? I don't. Which ones? Any of them? Any country? None.
All right, Alexander, let's get to some super chats. Guys, hit that like button, smash that like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. And remember, click that notifications bell. There's a lot of people saying they're not getting the notifications. I also didn't get a notification.
I didn't get it.
So, you know, hit that notifications bell. And if you are having trouble, you can download the Blank Chat app, Google Play Store, and iOS, Apple. I put all the notifications on there as well, so they go direct to your mobile of all the videos we do and the live shows. Alexander, a couple of super chats from Penguins fan. Did you notice that Canada was harping a lot about Venezuela when the Russian troops arrived with S-300s? They all went quiet. Should have bought the S-400s. So Canada and Canada was complaining about Venezuela. And another super chat from Penguins fan, update on Syria, especially Idlib. So Alexander.
Yes. Yes, I mean, let's first of all deal about the S-300s. I think it's important to stress that the Russians did not deliver S-300s in the last few months. They delivered those S-300s several years ago. I mean, I think the deal was done when Hugo Chavez was still alive and president of Venezuela. Now, we don't know the whole story about this Russian troop deployment, if that's what it is. My understanding is that these are principally advisors. They're not actually there to,
and technicians as well.
Exactly. They're not there to fulfill a direct combat role. And I think the assessment in Moscow, anyway, is that the Venezuelan military is capable of dealing with any small-term challenges. If the United States attacks Venezuela, then of course that is a different story. But I mean, that would be a huge event. And I mean, it would have massive international implications. As for Canada, well, frankly, I don't pay very much attention to what Canada says anymore. And, they may blow hot and cold about Venezuela. I think actually they behave disgracefully towards Venezuela, as they have to pretty much every other place. But as I said, I'm afraid a country that has, to all intents and purposes, surrendered its foreign policy to the neocons in Washington is not one that I think deserves much attention. And I don't think the Venezuelans care, and I don't think the Russians care. And I don't think, to answer the further question, that the Russians are going to deploy S-400s in Venezuela, not just because that would be a radical escalation, but because I suspect that there must be some people in Moscow who would worry that if S-400s were sent so far away from the territory of Russia and out of effective Russian control, the security of that system, which is one of Russia's most important systems, might be compromised. Now, as for Syria, what I understand has been happening is that, as I said, the Russians and the Turks are still in deep negotiations about bringing Idlib to heel. We've seen that the Turks are very unhappy about their relations with the United States. We've also seen that Turkey is now going through a major economic crisis, which is making it more dependent on Russia than it had been, precisely because it is going through that great quarrel with the United States, so it can't turn to the US for help. We also see that Iran and Turkey are talking more to each other, and they seem to be forging closer relations. Last but not least, I hear that there are now the beginnings of joint patrols between the Russian and Turkish militaries in part of Idlib province. I've heard that there is a slowdown in oil and fuel deliveries to Idlib province, which looks to me, from Turkey, which looks to me to be intended to weaken the position of the jihadis. And last but not least, and this is something which, of course, we've never talked about, and I should have talked about it on previous occasions, the Syrian army has, over the last few months, had what I suspect it has needed more than almost anything else, which is a good rest. It has been fighting this relentless war for 5 years. I mean, the first year of the conflict was mainly civil unrest, but after that, it was a very, very intense civil war, or war of intervention, rather.
Proxy war.
Proxy war, in which the Syrian army was driven back to Damascus and was besieged in Aleppo and in a few enclaves around the coast. It's now been rebuilt. Its men must be exhausted. Its officers must have been even more exhausted, having run through this crisis. And again, what I am hearing is that there's been a steady build-up in an expansion of the Syrian military over the last few months. And apparently, because Syria has been short of energy over the last few months, again, because of Western sanctions on the country, there's been a stepping up of oil and energy deliveries from Syria, with, believe it or not, the people of Crimea contributing to them. So I think what we're seeing is a steady shift in the balance of power. And I come back to my prediction, which is that sometime in the early summer, we will see the whole Idlib situation resolve itself.
Yeah, we have to keep in mind, there's another caveat here when it comes to Syria, is that the ridiculous and very dangerous proposition that the United States now will consider the Iran Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Now that is just a blow up waiting to happen, okay? Because American troops are illegally in Syria. We have elements of the Revolutionary Guard in Syria as well, and one deems the other as the enemy now. And an incident could happen. It could get out of control. Maybe that's what somebody in Washington wants to happen, okay? Again, this designation is just pouring kerosene on fire. It is so irresponsible and so misguided. It is intentionally wanting the situation to get worse. God.
Yes.
All right, Peter, a question from AP. Why does Russia think Turkish opposition is U.S. Euro allied? Turkish opposition is way more pro-Russia China than Islamist NATO puppet Erdogan. Opposition just wants a secular country, but independence. So do the Russians think that Turkish opposition is U.S. Euro allied?
I'm not sure I would characterize that. I think that if you look at how Turks feel about foreign policy, they're far more united on that. They're very anti-American. I mean, pro-Erdogan and anti-Erdogan. They're anti-American across the board. So I'm not sure that equation really makes any sense. And plus the opposition, I mean, of course, there's always going to be these NGOs sponsored by the United States, indirectly sponsored by the United States and funded, that will be getting in the act. But I mean, Erdogan has had a pretty effective dragnet. I mean, there are more journalists in prison in Turkey than any other country in the world. So I'm not really sure I would characterize that kind of calculation. I don't see the Turkish opposition looking to China for anything personally. I think that these are the secularists, the people that want to be integrated into Europe. I mean, if you go to Istanbul, it's remarkably Western, okay, remarkably so. I mean, I remember what is the drink they have there? It's an alcohol drink.
Raki.
And I remember, I love raki on ice. Oh, yes. Oh, it's just awesome in the summer. And I wanted to bring some bottles back to Moscow. And I was talking to the guy in the liquor store, and he says, they're trying to put us out of business. I mean, they don't want any alcohol. They're steadily making it more and more difficult for us to sell it and to distribute it. And he said, in Istanbul, it's a much more stronghold for them because there's a lot of tourists, there's a lot of people from Europe, and there are clubs and all that. But you go 15, 20 kilometers outside of Istanbul, you're in a different country, a very different country. It's very Islamic, it's very traditional. And it's really, Istanbul is just it's an enclave all by itself, very Western. You could live there and feel that it's just cosmopolitan, okay? And so I think the opposition, it's secularism. They're looking for like-minded people outside because the West is secular. So I wouldn't bring in like countries like China and all that. I mean, that's not China's bag, They just want trade, like the West should want trade. But Donald Trump doesn't want anybody to trade with anyone. It's amazing.
All right, let's do a couple more super chats, and then we'll shift gears to Trump, Peter, and to the Yemen war powers veto. Valley S, thank you for your super chat. We really appreciate it. And Alexander from Vladimir. Guys, can you comment on Basel III group statement that getting a zero risk monetary asset? Do you know about this, Alexander?
Well, that's for Alexander.
I've heard about this mythological zero risk monetary asset since I don't know how long. There is no such thing. There cannot be any such thing. I mean, if you listen to people like Mitch Feinstein and people like that, the people who actually work in markets, and they will tell you, you cannot eliminate risk from investment. The idea that you can create a zero risk financial asset is an absurdity. And to chase those kind of fantasies.
It's a Ponzi scheme, okay?
It's a Ponzi scheme, exactly. It explains why the whole situation in the financial world is as terrible as it is. So let's face up to the fact that there is always risk in any business or financial endeavor. There has to be. Obviously, there are some risks that are greater than others, some assets which are less risky than others. But there is no such thing as zero risk. And let's put that whole notion to sleep once and for all. And if we do, we can move forward and create a viable economic system that might actually work properly.
All right, Peter, let's shift gears and go to Trump. Yemen vetoing the War Powers Act. Bipartisan, by the way, Democrats and Republicans. On the Democrat side, I believe it was headed up by Rand Paul. Tulsi Gabbard spoke out very aggressively against Trump's veto. She blasted him for it in a video tweet as well. What do you make of it, Peter, what Trump did by vetoing that the War Powers Act and calling Saudi Arabia off of Yemen?
This is a catastrophic decision on his part here. As we made a video, I think a couple days ago. He's giving the anti-war plank to Bernie Sanders and people like Bernie Sanders, and more Democrats are going to get on board. Just you watch. But it's obvious Trump is listening to the Saudis, which is, that is such a. We were just talking about risk. Okay, I mean that is a huge geopolitical risk. Saudi Arabia is not a stable country. It's not even a country. It's a kingdom run by a very large, extended, corrupt family. And because of Pompeo, because of Bolton, Trump is putting way too many eggs into that basket there. It's always pitched as an anti-Iranian move. We have to support the Saudis in Yemen because Iran is a threat. That is a myth, everybody. It's a myth. Okay, the Houthis are they are Shia, but they have an enormous amount of distance from Iran. Now, is there Iranian involvement in Yemen? Yes, because of the invasion, because of the bombing, because of the aggression. That yes, some trickle of aid. It's the port city is blockaded. Okay, how can you get stuff in there? How can the Iranians fly anything in there? The airspace is controlled by the Saudis and their Western allies. I mean, this myth that you hear, Pompeo lies through his teeth. He lied to Congress. What was it, last October, September, saying that the U.S. is monitoring to make sure that there aren't any human rights violations in this operation. He lied through his teeth. I think Tulsi Gabbard before actually went after him for that too. Rand Paul did as well. So Trump is making a very, very big mistake, because by continuing the support of this absolutely senseless, horrific war, the U.S. gets nothing out of it. Only downside. And it's Trump trying to show that he has the executive power. The War Powers Act is infringing upon his presidential power and all that. No, if you read the War Powers Act, it's pretty clear. Okay, it still gives the president of the United States a really wide berth, but there's no national security interest for the United States at all. We have the crown prince in Saudi Arabia that has gone off on one foreign expedition after another, and every single time it fails. And Trump is on the side of failure on this one. And I'm sorry, everybody. I usually don't go first to the optics. I go to the facts and the geopolitical realities, but I'll go to the optics right now. The optics are really, really bad, okay? The senseless destruction of the poorest country in the region, okay, by one of the richest and most corrupt in the region. And the U.S. and its allies are on the wrong side of history. And of course, the Israelis are nudging the Saudis on, because remember, the Israelis, they want as much chaos in the region, because the more chaos, the better it is for them as they see the world. They like having all of these quagmires around. That means no one can gang up on Israel. I understand their logic. the morality of it, well, it's obviously left wanting.
Alexander, Trump ran on one of his major policy planks was running on getting out of wars, being a non-interventionist. Okay, he hasn't started any new wars, even though he's coming close, that's for sure. But it seems that he is escalating existing wars, much in the same way Obama did as well. What do you make of his veto of the War Powers Act and what it means for Yemen?
It's a case. I mean, it's wag the dog. It's wag the dog again. Is the tail wagging the whole dog? I mean, the Saudis have some issues with Iran, which I think are mainly ideological, because they see Iran as this Islamic republic, and they see that as a threat to the kind of autocracy, exactly the autocracy they have in Saudi Arabia. The Israelis see Iran as a threat because they see Iran as the most powerful Muslim country, which is in some way opposed to them. So these two proxies of the United States, Saudi Arabia and Israel, are basically taking control of US policy. And we see this in Yemen. I mean, it's been an absolute, complete and total disaster. As Peter said absolutely rightly, Yemen is a humanitarian catastrophe. It is a crime against humanity, with a war of aggression being waged against a desperately poor, extremely a small country. And of course, it is also of no conceivable security or geostrategic interest to the United States. And yet, because the Saudis and the Israelis have this obsession with Iran for different reasons, the United States has been dragged along and has been pulled along and is colluding with this thing. And all credit to people like Rand Paul and Tulsi Gabbard for saying that this is wrong, and all credit to them for getting the Senate and the Congress to support them on all of this. And Donald Trump, as Peter says absolutely rightly, is completely wrong, totally wrong to veto this. This is not realism. This is not a realistic foreign
But it was
policy.
a get out of
It's
jail.
a weak one.
Yeah, but it was a get out of jail free card, wasn't it? I mean, Trump could say, well, I mean, it's bipartisan, it's cross party lines, and we haven't really achieved anything. And I promised in 2016 that I wouldn't meddle in these types of things. He could have turned it into an easy win if he's thinking about 2020.
Peter, thinking about. Go ahead, Alexander.
What I wanted to say about Trump is I think that his extraordinary emotional involvement with Israel is the great blind spot in his conduct of foreign policy, and it makes it extremely easy for him to be manipulated by people who want to push this anti-Iranian agenda. And I don't think he really sees beyond this. So he's maneuvered the United States into this conflict with Iran, which he doesn't need. He's been maneuvered into dragging the United States into this conflict in Yemen, which, as I said, is a crime, a catastrophe, and a mistake. And I think it ultimately comes down to this obsession with Israel and with the personality of Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah. And I mean, if I have to say something about Donald Trump, and we'll no doubt be coming to the Mueller report shortly, the thing that comes across to me repeatedly is that he is a very easy man to manipulate. He doesn't always understand that people who are giving him advice, be it Netanyahu and people like Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, are actually using him to pursue their own agendas. And I'm afraid he gets into lots and lots of trouble because of that. And I'm afraid on this issue, he's not only wrong, but he's dragging the United States into trouble also.
Peter,
the interesting thing is that there is a method to the madness here. If you look at Trump's base, about 25% of it are evangelical Christians that are fanatical about Israel because of theological reasons here. And Trump is convinced that he needs to keep that block of his base intact. That is the foundational stone of his electoral strategy for 2020. He wants to make sure he's got them in his corner. He's gonna keep pounding away at the middle class, the white collar, blue collar workers. But he has his foundational stone in their evangelical Christians. So there's a method to this madness.
Peter, do you believe that Trump, as Alexander puts it, does have an Israel blind spot or a Netanyahu blind spot? And you mentioned the 2020 elections. Do you think, you said that Trump, he could have turned this into a win if he played his cards right. Do you think the Democrats or some of the Democrats running in the 2020, Gabbard, Sanders, can turn this into a win?
Oh, for them, yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Because like I said, we do facts, we do geopolitical realities, and then we do the optics. They'll go for the optics in a heartbeat. Okay. Does Trump have a blind spot for Israel? Yeah. Some of his most powerful and influential donors are Israeli firsters. Okay. And he doesn't want to he doesn't want to lose that money for his campaign. Yeah. Remember, Trump never likes to use his own money. He likes to use everybody else's money. So it's part of his donor base at home. And Israel is they're one issue people. Israel.
Do you think, Peter, that Tulsi Gabbard using foreign policy as her main campaign plank, do you think that she could gain on Trump? Do you think she can become a contender, or do you think it's Bernie's to take?
Well, first of all, I think it's Bernie's to take. Okay, he's got the name recognition, and he has so much more exposure in the media that if he wants to cultivate this issue, I think he can steal it from Tulsi. But it's all three of us here and our viewers here. This is a very important issue. And because I think at the end of the day, it's something we don't always talk about in geopolitics, but it's a moral issue here. But unfortunately, it isn't widely disseminated within the American electorate. I mean, it's Stormy Daniels, it's the creepy porn lawyer, it's Smollett, it's Roger Stone. I sent you guys the article. He's apparently appearing in strip bars, giving speeches for money. That's going to be all over Fox tomorrow, I can guarantee you. So the American public is intentionally not educated about foreign policy, intentionally. All right, because then you see the contradictions and you see the double standards, you see the hypocrisy, and they just don't want to delve into it. They really don't. And because they have well-paid, good-looking people to read glass in an autocue and just say what they're told to say. This is one of the great shames of our time. If people were made aware of these things, I think they would there would be an attachment to it to do the right thing. I mean, somebody, and I saw this on Facebook, and I'm not saying it's true, but I saw it a number of times, is that for an entire year, MSNBC never mentioned Yemen. When 60 Minutes, CBS, when they did a program on Yemen, they completely left out American involvement in the conflict. I mean, there's FAIR and other media watchdogs. They were savage against CBS for not mentioning. You really left out a big part of the story. It's a tragedy and these poor people, but they didn't explain why it's happening to these poor people. I mean, that is the state of journalism right now. That was just a psych op report for the CIA, okay, and the deep state. That obvious. It's that obvious.
All right, guys, we've closed out the first hour. Remember to hit that like button, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't subscribed. Go to the Duran shop, buy a t-shirt. It really helps us out. Alexander, Trump did get a win last week. It wasn't, he may have lost on the War Powers Act, but he got a big win. And that came, you mentioned it earlier, that came in the Mueller report and in AG Barr's press conference, and how he summed things up. AG Barr was impressive, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought he was impressive. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, is saying to impeach Trump, we can impeach him. Schiff and Pelosi are saying we can't impeach him. Alexander, break it down. What's going on?
No, we shouldn't.
We shouldn't. Yes. What's going on post Mueller?
Well, the first thing to say is that Barr summarized Mueller absolutely correctly. I know there's a frantic spin operation to pretend otherwise, but there's no question about it. He gave a completely correct account of Mueller. I've read that dreary, nasty report from page to page. I've reread it, by the way, since we did our live about it, Alex. And I will say straightforwardly, a very grossly partisan report. It didn't in the end lay a finger on Trump on collusion, and its entire exercise on obstruction, which is where I think this thing was going for at least the last year of its existence, just doesn't add up. I mean, it uses all sorts of fancy legal language and all sorts of, multiple citations of cases to make it all look as if there's something there, which actually there isn't anything there.
There's no there there.
There is no there on obstruction. There really isn't. And I think people like Schiff, we must never forget, is a lawyer. And I think deep down, in the core of his being, he understands that. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she is not a lawyer. I don't think she does understand this.
She's a bartender.
She's taken some of these headlines.
She doesn't even write her own tweets, guys.
Well, there you go. She's taken some of these really snarky comments and some of these sophisticated and profoundly flawed legal arguments that are in this Mueller report, and imagines that she can build an impeachment case on them. And of course she can't. And by the way,
she can't. No, she
can't.
She shouldn't.
She shouldn't.
That again.
She should.
And I will. When you finish, I will explain. All right, keep going.
Well, I mean, anyway, to carry on. I mean, she shouldn't. Unfortunately, there are a lot of uninformed people, because very few people have read this report. Very few people have the kind of background that enables them to see through the completely phony nature of this obstruction allegation, even though Barr, to his credit, has tried to explain it and has done so, in my opinion, as clearly as it is possible to do. And I'm afraid they're being swept along. And as I said, I predict that sooner or later we will get an impeachment, an attempt to trigger an impeachment on this. But as I said, it will be ridiculous. Over to you, Peter.
Peter.
The reason why I said the word shouldn't is because it will tear not the country apart. It will tear the Democratic Party apart. Okay. What they need, see, what Pelosi and Schumer want to do, and what they've wanted all along, grounds for impeachment are not really there. We have to remind our viewers, impeachment is a political process. You can you can find any kind of wrongdoing, of the smallest degree, and it has to be the Congress, the House of Representatives, to vote on it, on articles of impeachment, and send it to the Senate. Well, first of all, I don't see anything in the report that Senate Republicans would go along with. Okay, but they want to keep churning the story of working towards impeachment, but never actually go there. Okay, because what Pelosi and Schumer want to do, they're the biggest victims of all of this now, because now it's got the balance is tipped. Now it's going in the other direction. Now Pelosi and the establishment Democrats, they are an endangered species, because you have the AOCs out there that really want to go after this, because their hardcore base really wants this, because it's spite. It's like voting for Zielinski in Ukraine, just because it makes you feel good, like Trump voters did in 2016. This is a political minefield. And remember, and Schumer remembers, and Pelosi remembers, because they were there, what happened to the Democrats after the fiasco with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. It backfired. George W. Bush was elected. And the Democrats got a bloody nose all through the House of Representatives and the Senate. This is really bad tactics, and that's why I keep saying they shouldn't do it. They do it, sure, but would they succeed? Most likely not. I mean, there's almost no chance whatsoever. But their strategy is, and this is what Adam Schiff wants to do. They just want to keep churning it. Okay, they know that there isn't going to be any end. There's no omega to this. The omega is the election night in November 2020. All right, so that's what they want to do. They want to keep it alive, but they know that it doesn't have any. It won't come to any kind of fruition. It's an issue. It's not a policy. It's an issue that they want to keep the Democratic Party unified around, because actually doing the process would be a political mistake.
Peter, Pelosi, in my opinion, seems to be getting sick of AOC. She was, I believe, at a conference or at an interview, and she said, even a glass of water could get elected in her district.
If it had a D on it.
Yeah, if it had a D on it. And I think she was on 60 Minutes as well. And they gave her some questions, and she was like, well, you know, AOC is not really the party. It's only like a group of 4 or 5 people. Do you get the sense that Pelosi, as well as a lot of America, a lot of the world, is just getting very, very sick of AOC?
Well, I think you know that this is a reflection of this huge division, this chasm that has been created in American politics. There's a lot of people like AOC that are not necessarily interested in policies. They're interested in revenge. It's a vengeful process. And AOC does this. I mean, she's got to be the most photographed person in America right now. She's everywhere, okay? Everyone should check out this little 8-year-old girl did a mock interview of AOC. I can't even describe it. It is so funny, okay? It's gone viral. It's going all over the place, okay? But I can. But see, this is what happens when you let extremists into the barn, okay? It's contagious for other people. Do you remember when AOC was on Capitol Hill, on the Capitol Hill steps, and she was unveiling the new green deal? You know, and then you had all of these, you know, guys in their 50s and 60s, been in Congress for decades, and they're standing around this little lady, you know, and they're nodding their head because they're being cowed to move further and further to the left. Because if you're not for these new progressive ideas, then you're our enemy too. I mean, they can't find consensus. This is what happens. People get so radicalized, and the media loves it because it's good for their bottom line. It's good pictures. It's good footage. Okay, and they have this visceral hatred of Trump, and they see people like AOC, incorrectly, I would say, but they see her as an antidote to Trumpism. Okay. And it's all on the left. It's all on their mess, on their side, okay? And Donald Trump should just be sleeping better at night. Let them continue down this path of self-destruction. It's a circular firing squad. This helps Trump. And I will make a prediction. If there is no recession, Trump will get reelected because of this nonsense that you see on the left. Because Bernie isn't going to be pure enough at one point, okay? Bernie isn't. And there's speculation that the Democrats are going to go down this super delegate path again, that honey sweet deal that was supposed to get it for Hillary Clinton, and it did, the super delegates. And these super delegates are going to be the Nancy Pelosi's and the Chuck Schumers, and that's going to get the base so angry it will have a repeat of what they did to Bernie Sanders. This is a cataclysm for the left. Get the popcorn out and watch.
Alexander, no recession. Do you think Trump comes through 2020?
Oh, absolutely. I think this has been a gift to him. And can I just say something, which is, of course, it's the Pelosi's, the Schumers, the Schiffs, and the Nadlers who have given it to him, because they have spent the last 3 years endlessly talking up this Russiagate story, talking about this huge conspiracy that Donald Trump was involved in with the Russians. And they've also sponsored this grotesquely partisan report, which Mueller has produced, which, as I said, says, in fact, that there was no collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians, but which has created this utterly far-fetched and fanciful theory of obstruction. And I really want to stress the words fanciful and far-fetched, I mean, Pelosi, Schumer, Schiff and Nadler and co, reading that report, know how far-fetched it is and fanciful it is. But of course, by doing all of that, they've worked up their base and they've made sure that people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will take all that nonsense in the report about obstruction seriously. Why shouldn't she? So it's not surprising, in a sense, that she's coming round and saying, well, you people have been telling me how bad Trump is and what a terrible president he is. Well, I've got a report which says all these terrible things about him on the obstruction. So why aren't we going forward with impeachment? It's the trap they created, they sprung on themselves, and they've only got themselves to blame for it. And I agree with Peter. They're going to face terrible consequences from this going forward.
And let's keep in mind, guys, is that there's a new sheriff in town, A.G. Barr, and he's going to. And so, as much as the Democrats want to stir this theories, which most should have never put in that report, either you indict or you don't indict. Okay, that's it. That's how it usually works. Okay, that's how it always works. I've never heard someone giving theories. Okay, is it illegal? Yes or no? No, it's not. It's not illegal. Then why are you putting it in? Okay, and this is a trap that they've set for themselves here. And we're going to find out about Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and Bruce Orr and Jim Comey, and I can keep naming names. Okay, so they're going to be we're going to have counter narratives. Okay, and one is going to work. They're going to find real guilty people in real indictments, real grand juries, and not this fantasy that they're going to be consuming with a burning appetite as they go into the primary season. Watch the more they go down this rabbit hole, go against each other. Who's the more purist anti-Trump? That's what it's going to be. It's a trap for themselves.
All right, let's do some super chats before we get into the elections that are going to be coming up in the 23rd of May for the EU Parliament. And not that we're going to focus on the European countries voting in those elections. We are going to focus, though, on Brexit and how it's connected to those elections. So before we get to that, let me get to some super chats. Alexander from Penguins fan. South Africa, what will happen? Will the government take farms from the whites without compensation? Apartheid was way better. Alexander.
I think that's exactly where we're moving. I think this is now the policy of the government of Ramaphosa, who's the president, who was supposed to be the moderate, who was going to take over from Zuma. But I think that is clearly where we're heading. And I mean, I have to say I'm very sorry about South Africa, because after apartheid, the sort of brief period when Nelson Mandela was president, it looked as if things were moving forward in a good way. But it looks to me as if South Africa is rapidly going wrong. In the same way, I'm sorry to say, as many African countries have gone wrong. I mean, it should have worked to improve education for its people much more. It should have worked to try and build up its industries, with which it has many. It should have tried to integrate itself more effectively in the world economy. Instead, one gets the sense that, there are powerful senses of grievance in Africa, all over Africa, about how land was taken from the black people by the white settlers when they came. But you have to draw a historical line, in my opinion, and move on. And what is now going to happen is, as I said, it's going to intensify the economic crisis and the breakdown of government in that country. Which is very sad.
You have to draw historical lines, but you have to draw legal lines too, because this is a horrific, slippery slope. Okay, yes. And that is what's really terrifying. Is that if the state can illegally, without compensation, take your land, they can do it to anyone, even to blacks. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, really, and the history of what white settlement in South Africa is a lot more complicated than the the ANC and all these other people want to make it. I mean, a lot of these white farmers, they actually bought land. They moved on to land that no one claimed ownership. It's a lot more complicated. Being a historian, a trained historian, I understand about historical grievance, but you have to manage it where you don't create another historical injustice. And all of this is not going to fix South Africa's economy. This is not. This is a distraction from some really very dangerous trends that are going on in South Africa.
All right, I got a super chat from GEC11112. Interesting name. Peter, Trudeau is behind the Lima Group to use for regime change. Trudeau has strong links to the oil industry, and the Trudeau Foundation is similar to the Clinton Foundation. Do you think Trudeau is as nefarious and as corrupt as Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation?
Oh, that's not possible. No, the Clinton Foundation wrote the book. Everybody else only writes a chapter. No, I think it's Christina Freeland. I think this is what the Lima Group is. I mean, it was her brainchild. Okay, it was the way for Canada to play its role in the Western Hemisphere with a nod and a wink from Washington. So, I think Alexander Mercouris has already said it. I mean, Canada is just embarrassing itself left, right, and center. Canada used to be a very different country, and a different country in a good sense, I would say. All right, this Trudeau and his ridiculous politics is just it's taking down something that was really basically a great place, good people, and it worked. Okay, and these foreign policy adventures. What does Canada have to do with Venezuela outside of maybe like the questionnaire? The questioner is pointing out, it says maybe it's just to get inside the Venezuelan oil sector, which is I would very much believe. Yeah, I would believe that. Canada is a very important energy provider and exporter. So yes, I mean following the American playbook. I mean basically mimicking what John Bolton said to MSNBC is that the American country, the U.S. government is interested in having American oil concerns in. And what he used the word capacity in Venezuela. I mean, John Bolton is at least transparent on, this is just an asset grab. And I wouldn't for a second doubt that the Canadians aren't doing the same thing.
All right, Alexander, super chat from Priyanshu. How do you see Haftar's victories in Libya?
Well, I've already expressed my own personal view, which is that if Haftar succeeds in uniting Libya, and creating some kind of stability in the place, it is an improvement over what is there now and of what the United States and these other powers that destroyed Libya in 2011 have created. So whilst I have no illusions about Haftar, I mean, he's clearly out there for himself, I'd say. I mean, I don't think there's much doubt about that. If he is the only person in Libya who's able to bring some kind of stabilization to the place, then, I mean, he is the least bad option. And my God, the other options are terrible. Yeah, so that's my view about this.
But, well, number one, his offensive is sputtering out, okay? He was more hat, all hat, no cows, okay, in that respect. I mean, no, because, I mean, it was a PR offensive as well, the whole telephone conversation with Trump, the Trump administration changes its position within a week. Oh my goodness! Maybe we'll get the backstory on that one day. And also, Haftar is making it. He's taking with his offensive against what the UN recognizes as a legitimate government. It's taking the heat off the jihadists. Okay, that is not good. Okay, because the Tripoli, they're going to have to defend whatever sovereign control they have, and this is giving breathing space to jihadists that were never there before the end of before Gaddafi was murdered. Okay, they had no Al Qaeda there, they had no jihadists there. Gaddafi made sure that didn't happen. Okay, so I think everything right now is in super flux right now. I was even going to do a program on it tomorrow, then I've decided to wait a few more days because I want to see if things are getting into focus, because it's really fuzzy right now.
Yes.
All right, Peter, a super chat from Lori Mitgalpal. How does AOC's pushing policies for the middle class, the poor, and for the planet extremist and far left? She fights the establishment, don't you?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess this is what separates the three of us in our worldview from the people like AOC. Look, AOC sees the Green New Deal as a silver bullet that will solve all problems. This is how the left thinks all of the time. The big idea will solve all problems all at the same time, and everyone's a winner. That's not how life works, and that's not how politics works. Look, if someone is going to present me a way where you can have economic growth and prosperity and at the same time protect and preserve the environment, show it to me. Show it to me. I'd be glad to read it. All right. I don't believe that you have to nationalize the entire economy because, first of all, nobody knows if it's going to work. All right. This is a theory. And if I've read parts of it. I mean, it wasn't really a policy wonk that wrote it. It was like a journalist. Okay. It sounds really great, but it's so thin on details. So, I mean, I agree with the AOC's in her crowd to challenge the status quo and challenge the establishment. Yeah, okay, but do it with some reasonable ideas, and don't do it just through emotion. I think we have moments of humor during our podcast here, but we're pretty sober people. Okay, we're pretty sober, and we don't have a grand theory that's going to fix everything. We are very incremental and saying this policy works, this doesn't work, this is problematic, there's a lot of risk, etc., etc. We call on this podcast we do balls and strikes. That's all we do. All right, but I am not an ideologue, not at all. Okay, because ideologues always make things worse, always.
And you say that as a historian, so listen to Peter's words there. He knows. Alexander from David Bauer, more tolerant of AOC. This far out from 2020, she is shifting the Overton window for mainstream Americans. What do you make of that? Is she shifting the Overton window?
Yes.
In a good way?
I'm not right. I mean, I have to be careful because, of course, I'm not a great expert on U.S. politics, at least certainly not on the level that Peter is. But on balance, I have a little more sympathy for Ocasio-Cortez than Peter does. I mean, her economic ideas, I mean, they just don't stack up. The new monetary policy that she's talking about, I think is frankly nonsense. I don't believe that any of these things that she's talking about are ever going to happen. But you have a Democratic Party which has become completely riddled with corruption. I mean, the way in which we only have to look at what happened in the 2016 elections to see that. We've got also all these utterly discredited and frankly appalling figures in the Democratic Party. The establishment is a terrible one. Perhaps we need someone like Ocasio-Cortez who, to be very clear, is, in my opinion, a far bigger danger to the Democratic Party establishment than she is to Donald Trump or the Republicans, at least in the short term. We need people like her to start, as I said, clearing out the Augean stables of the Democratic Party to actually challenge these corrupt elites that have gained control of it.
But isn't there a sense of proportion here? I mean, AOC. I mean, I'll tell you exactly how I feel about her. I don't have any ill will towards her as a person. I mean, why would I? But I mean, it seems to me that she's a red guard. Okay, she's a red guard, and if you don't agree with the party, you're the enemy of the people. I mean, this is like the fervor of Pol Pot in Cambodia. Okay, I mean, this level of rhetorical intimidation. I'm the boss. Oh, come on. I mean, you've been in Congress for a few months, okay? You were a bartender last year. Slow down, lady. Slow down. Okay?
Well, indeed. I mean, that is the other thing.
No, but I mean, what I don't like is this ideological obsession, this fervor that she says that she is morally right without the facts, and intimidates other people on a rhetorical level, on a psychological level, and that is just ridiculous and only leads to bad ends. Okay.
Yes,
now,
I mean,
personally, I mean, watching the Pelosi and the AOC squabble, that's just that's daytime drama. Okay, but I do not like this tactic of intimidation. It's no different than Adam Schiff. Basically on his committee, if you don't believe that Trump is an agent of Russia, then you're a traitor. I mean, they'll judge your patriotism. It never goes in the right way, guys. It never goes down the right path when you get to that level of rhetorical expression. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to say one thing. I mean, she's clearly come very fast, very far, and I think that has definitely gone to her head a little. I still find Adam Schiff, well, a lot. I still find Adam Schiff, frankly, an infinitely more sinister individual. I mean, I mean, it will take an awful lot to persuade me that Ocasio-Cortez is as dangerous to the proper workings of American government, or indeed to the political system, as Adam Schiff has been.
Yeah, but Alex, I mean, how many of the 2000 and 2020 Democratic hopefuls have embraced the Green New Deal? They don't even know what it is. I mean, and it's because of this shutting down discussion and debate. Okay, and that's why I call her the Red Guard. Okay, she's a nice person. I'm sure she served good beer. All right, but I mean. When the media puts someone like this, it supercharges someone like this, it's great for ratings. Yeah, it's great for ratings. Mocking Donald Trump during the campaign, during the Republican primary, was great for ratings, okay? But it actually opened up political spaces that at one point you could not control, okay? And that's why I'm very circumspect about people that behave and talk like AOC, because it for the third time, it never ends well.
All right, let's talk about something not ending well, Alexander. Brexit. boy, did that not end.
Well.
Did
Alex,
you like how I segmented into that,
Alexander?
We have the European elections.
Great segue.
Thank you.
Yes, well, great segue. Well, I'm going to say something. And actually, I actually have a very small and very, shall I say, circumspect flutter of hope, because since we did our video about this thing a few days ago about how the European elections in Britain are heading Nigel Farage's way, the momentum has continued to go very heavily in his favour. He is now topping the poll. He's overtaken both the Conservative and the Labour parties, and he's still growing. Now, a lot of this has been at the expense of UKIP, which we predicted, by the way. I mean, some people who were listening to us were, I think, resistant to the idea. But what is happening is that pro-Brexit opinion is coalescing around him, both the two big parties, the Conservatives and Labour. And it's important to stress and Labour, because though the Conservatives have been hit badly, most Labour has also been hit and will continue to be, in my opinion. Both of them are down. This new dreadful centrist pro-EU party, Change UK, which we were talking about, that seems to be fading away like like the frost is in Moscow, as we're talking about now. And as I said, the entire momentum seems to be under Nigel Farage, but behind Nigel Farage. Now, if Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party does as well in the European elections, as is now looking increasingly likely, I think that's going to be a huge shock to the political system, both in Britain and, I predicted, the EU. And I read a very interesting article in the Financial Times in which it was saying that opinion in Germany, which had been trying to sort of massage Brexit to try and help Theresa May because they want to keep the access to the British market, that opinion in Germany is now becoming increasingly horrified at these developments and is starting to harden. And they're saying to themselves, the absolute last thing we want is Nigel Farage at the head of a very big contingent of anti-EU British MPs in the European Parliament. And the last thing we want is Boris Johnson as Conservative leader. And I should say there's now increasing talk, again, of a no confidence vote being brought forward against Theresa May by an increasingly desperate Conservative Party. And I'm sorry to say this. I mean, we all know my opinions about Boris Johnson, but I mean, he is perhaps the only thing left now. And apparently the Germans are horrified by this. And it seems that they're saying to themselves, well, you know, let's find a way of getting the British out of the EU as soon as possible, rather than let the situation go on. So maybe Nigel Farage is going to achieve the same thing twice. It was his breakthrough, which UKIP, which caused the referendum to happen. And perhaps his breakthrough, or his prospective breakthrough in the European Parliament elections, might make something similar happen. We shall just have to wait and see. Very good article about this, by the way, by Tom Luongo, which I would strongly recommend people to read, in which he discusses these very things. Linked on our site. You'll be able to find it on our site very shortly.
So they put the list of political obituaries is going to be long before this is all over. Okay, I mean, okay, Boris Johnson. I mean, the Ukrainians
and deservedly
so. Okay,
yeah.
Well, the Ukrainians voted for Zielinski. Maybe Boris Johnson should give it a shot. Who knows these days?
Yeah. Well, indeed, quite. I mean, we would also have a clown as prime minister, but if a clown is better than Poroshenko in Ukraine, then a clown may be better than Theresa May in Britain.
Good point.
I mean,
Bravo.
I have no respect for Boris Johnson, but I mean, at least we would be short of this most disastrous prime minister I can remember. I mean, who has brought Britain to this crisis, this point of utter and complete crisis.
Peter, what do you make of Farage? I don't think I've ever heard you discuss Farage. What do you make of him as a politician?
I think he's a brilliant politician. Absolutely, he knows how to manage a message. He knows how to channel it. I lost a lot of respect for him when he resigned from UKIP after the referendum. I thought that wasn't a noble decision to make. I mean, it was his baby, as it were. He should have guided the process, and I think it would have added some stability to it. I think that Theresa May should have, and I know this sounds a bit crazy, but he should have been a special advisor to the process, because she kept it all secret to herself. I mean, she didn't share, okay, and misled different members within her own party. I think we need the person that was the brainchild behind Brexit should have been part of the process. And when he left UKIP like that, it was almost abandoning his own child. And I thought that was a huge political mistake. But overall, I really like how he takes on the hardest questions. Like, he's a xenophobe and all these kinds of things. And he really has very good reactions. The guy thinks fast. And that's a mark of super intelligence. And he is an entrepreneur. He understands how the world works. Chuck Schumer, leading the Democrats in the Senate, he's never had a real job in his life. He's always been sucking on the teat of the state. Okay, I mean, Nigel Farage at least knows the world of business, and that informed his opinions on how Brexit should work and shouldn't work. So, I mean, I like Nigel Farage. Okay, and when I see he's got a new video on YouTube, I almost always watch it.
All right, Alexander, a super chat from Matt. Alexander, can you indulge us with some speculation as to what emboldened moves the EU might make now that it realizes no one can leave?
Well, let's hope that proves wrong. I appreciate it to hope rather than than a lesson drawn from experience. But we will see. I'm not giving up hope yet. But if the EU is really convinced that no one can leave and that it is a prison and that it can stamp its feet on everyone, then I suspect that we will start to see moves within the EU bureaucracy to adopt more and more of the Macron project, which is to say, make it even more centralized.
More Europe,
more Europe in the bureaucracy. Start bringing more control of foreign policy, more control of defense policy. Start to evolve towards a unified pan-European tax system. And I suspect that if they do that, which I'm sure that's the agenda of some people, I think that will multiply ultimately the resistance across Europe. And I think that the country then which will feel itself under particular pressure will be Germany, because I think the idea that Germans might have to pay taxes to bail out people all over Europe and do so on a regular basis, I think that would provoke massive resistance in Germany. And Germany is a country I know well. And yes, it is a strong economy, but wages have stagnated there for a long time. People don't seem to understand this. So a lot of people in Germany feel under a great deal of economic pressure. And the idea that they can, single-handedly keep this whole thing going and that it could centralize even more, I think it will provoke a massive reaction. But if that's what the EU thinks it can get away with, and that this Brexit rebellion has been squashed, I predict that is what they will try to do.
Yeah, but nobody's going to vote on it, right? Sorry, that's just a little.
Oh, they would find ways.
That's the fly in the ointment. It's not democratic though. All right? It's not Nobody's going to ask people. No, it's very interesting.
I mean,
it's very interesting what Alexander Mercouris had to say about Germany, because if you look at the evolution of German history since the Second World War, and particularly after unification at the end of the Berlin Wall, is that Germany has up front been willing to pay it's willing to lose its sovereignty as reparations, popular word these days, for the Second World War. But Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. Is we're getting to a historical point where we did that. The Germans did that. They've done what they admitted to what they did wrong, and they've compensated and they've commemorated the suffering. Okay, but I think Alexander Mercouris is right. Is that now we're getting to, again, to use a kind of a Second World War metaphor, it's a bridge too far, because then essentially Germany as an economic powerhouse will not continue as an economic powerhouse if it's going to have to pay everybody else's bills. Then I think their sense of being magnanimous, you push the limits of it. Okay, I mean, this is business, guys. I mean, it's about dollars and cents, euros and cents. Okay, I mean, again, I keep stressing is that a lot of these things for many people, it's trafficked and fed into the media, is that it's this virtue signaling. Wouldn't it be nice? Well, yeah, it would be nice if I had a cheeseburger in my hand right now. But if I want to have a cheeseburger in my hand right now, I'm going to have to do something about it. I'm going to have to make decisions. I'm going to expend resources, spend time. Okay, but it would be nice. And I'm tired of listening to these Eurocrats talking about, wouldn't it be nice to have a more united Europe? Well, tell me what you mean by that. And they don't. Okay, they don't want to, because we pay the price. They don't. We pay the price for their bad decisions. Okay, is a united Europe necessarily a good idea? I mean, it's just assumed it is. Well, why? Explain to me. Inquiring minds want to know, and I think that's the disconnect here.
Peter, a super chat from John Huber. When do the virtues of democracy morph into the vices of populism?
Populism is a style of politics. Okay, I don't like people maligning populism so much, because I think it's being mischaracterized a lot. You have populism on the left, you have a populism on the right, and whenever you use the correct usage of the term populism is a critique of the establishment and of the radical center. I hate quoting Tony Blair, but I just did. It is a critique of the radical center that actually has no interest in democracy, because everything has been settled. Everything has been settled. And it's these people that they fear democracy. They fear democracy when the discourse, the narrative is diverted into a direction that they cannot control. And this is why we get populism, because populism is a critique of the radical center and their lack of interest in the democratic process. Okay, you already voted for this. We don't have to vote on it again. That's what they'll say to you all of the time. Or if we have a vote on something and we don't get the outcome we like, we're just going to have another vote until you get it right. Okay, it's always incumbent upon the people, it's not incumbent upon the establishment to be responsible for the decisions they make. And that's why we get populism on left and right. It's very simple. And again, I don't like maligning it, okay? There are people that call them populists that I find odious, absolutely odious, okay? But don't conflate a critique of power with someone that is a radical in one form on the left or on the right, okay? Don't conflate them, because that's what the establishment figures want you to do. That's what the media wants you to do. Question that equation.
All right, Alexander. Let's see. I lost the question. It was in the chat. But the question was if we could comment a little as to what's going on in Yugoslavia and even Kosovo, but not even touch so much on Kosovo as the focus central point. Just in general, what's the latest news out of Yugoslavia?
Former Yugoslavia.
Former Yugoslavia.
Bombing was to rob ex-Yugoslavia to create. Yeah. Okay. Go on, Alexander. I apologize for that.
Well, lots is going on in that part of the world. I mean, we have elections coming up in Macedonia, or I don't quite know what to call it now. Northern Macedonia.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Well, of course, officially, it's Northern Macedonia. Anyway, we're having elections.
Northern Macedonia. I mean.
Northern Macedonia. Let's call it that. I mean,
sealed.
Yeah, signed and sealed. So anyway, Northern Macedonia, there's elections coming up there, and that'll be an opportunity for the people of that country to pass to say what they think about the way that a name change was forced on them. Though, of course, one always has to be careful because, as we've often said on these programs, it's who counts the votes rather than who casts them who often has the upper hand in these situations. We've also got protests in Serbia, which have been going on for some time, against the government there. And there is an interesting set of protests because they seem to bring together various disparate groups. There's nationalists who don't like the Serbian government's accommodating policy as they see it on Kosovo. There are very, very strong pro-EU, pro-Western aligned people. Perhaps they are the dominant element in these protests. At least that's what some of the people I've read have suggested, who basically dislike the Serbian government's good relations with Russia. But these protests have so far failed in Serbia to crystallize into a concerted challenge against the Serbian government. And I understand it that there's political conflicts in Kosovo also, and of course there always are in Bosnia too. So it's always an unstable situation in this part of the world. But I always come back to this. The key country is Serbia. Serbia is far and away the most powerful and the most developed and the most coherent of all the former or ex-Yugoslav republics. I would put it ahead of even Croatia, for example.
No, I wouldn't put it ahead of Slovenia. I think they're pretty...
Well, I know quite a few people from Slovenia, and they all tell me the same thing. Very demoralized country. Things not going terribly well there. So yes, rich in some ways, but as I said, perhaps not as unified in national terms as Serbia is.
That's for sure. Their national identity is very strong.
Yes, exactly. So Serbia is in some ways the most interesting country to watch, and it's where the great tug of war is happening. And I say tug of war So Peter will correct me when he points out that, of course, it's a tug of war in which the Russians are not really pulling. I mean, they want good relations with Serbia. They're not playing some dark game in Serbia. But of course, the US is, and the EU is, and I mean, they are trying to shape this area and to pull all these countries into the EU and into the NATO system. And that's why they're meddling in the internal politics of all of these countries, including, of course, Macedonia, Northern Macedonia, including Bosnia, including Kosovo, but first and foremost Serbia, because, as I said, that's the big prize. And my impression is things are not going their way, because I get the impression that a lot of people in Serbia are actually pretty awake to what is happening, and that there is quite a lot of resistance to it. So it's definitely a place to keep watching. And I've made this prediction. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow or next year, but sooner or later there is going to be a breakup in a real bust up in the Balkans, because what Western policy has done is that it's surrounded Serbia, which West is very suspicious of because of the connections Serbs have to Russia. They've surrounded Serbia with unstable microstates, Northern Macedonia, Bosnia, Kosovo, all those. Again, with Serbia having grievances against all of them. And those countries,
and all of them grievances with Serbia, right?
With Serbia, exactly. So this is almost by definition an unstable situation. And at some point, I don't know, I'm not giving a date, but at some point it's going to break down, and we will see a major eruption in the Balkan Wars, which the attempted Western settlement of the previous cycle of Balkan Wars has guaranteed. The Western creation of these microstates and the West's treatment of Serbia has made it a certainty that sooner or later more conflict is coming.
It's like a repeat of the Treaty of Versailles. It's remarkable. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's exactly the same.
You create the creation of all of these new states in Europe that were unstable. They were ethnically mixed. The national ideal was confused. It wasn't solidified, and they didn't have protected borders. This is, I just mentioned, that's the post-World War I. That's exactly what we have in the Balkans right now. Exactly.
Well, there you are, Peter. You're a historian, and you've been able to make the exact parallel, because I think it's a striking one. And obviously, the Balkans is a smaller territory than Central Europe. But let's not be under any illusions about this. When there is the crash in the Balkans, which is coming, it will have major international repercussions, because obviously the Western powers are there. And of course, the Russians have also got very strong sentimental connections to these countries. Not just, by the way, to Serbia. A lot of people that I know from the Balkans, Bulgarians, and other people from other places, Montenegro, Northern Macedonia, all these places, even Slovenia and Croatia, tell me that they have a fairly strong connection as Slavs to the premier Slav country, which is Russia. And of course, to add to the explosive mix, there's all these pipelines that are now being built, which will link up Central Europe through the Balkans to Turk Stream. So it's going to, when the bust comes, which it will have major international repercussions. And let's hope that it's managed better this time than it was last time. Though with people like Pompeo and Bolton on the loose, if they're still there, I can't have any confidence of that.
Okay, let's do a couple more questions, a couple more super chats, and wrap it up. Peter, what do you make of Washington ending exemptions to waivers, India and China regarding Iranian oil purchases? What do you make of that story? I think it was just announced today. I think.
It's a fascinating story. I was reading about it this morning. It's a pipe dream. I mean, this is ridiculous. What they want to do is obviously the Trump administration under the leadership of Pompeo and Bolton, they essentially want to starve the Iranian economy to death. Okay, they want to make sure it can't have any exports. Countries like India and China are not going to play ball with Washington at all. But the countries that are subdued. It's good to see they don't have a lot of excess capacity on the petrol market right now, so prices are going to go up. Donald Trump, if you're watching, you have an election coming up. Do you really want your Midwesterners, your base, to pay more for gasoline? Okay, really? Okay, this is so misguided. Again, this is this ideological possession. Is that to get Iran? And what it does is it has the law of unintended consequences. What it's going to do, it's going to disrupt the petrol markets. We're not going to have stability in price. And it's a nightmare for everybody involved. This is completely unnecessary. Oh, by the way, it never changes the behavior of elites in countries. Sanctions don't work, particularly countries that are large, populous, and have resources in every sense of that word. Iran has them. Is it going to be painful? Yes. Is it painful? Yes. But it's not going to be a determining factor for regime change, and that is the desired goal. And it's not going to happen. But blow up the energy markets. Okay, that didn't work. What do we do next? That's exactly what's going to happen. No one's held responsible for these things here. This is, you fiddle with these energy markets too much, and you really can lose control of what's going on here. Okay, really. And this is just another attempt by the U.S. to go around international law, around the United Nations, and just unilaterally sanction countries and companies around the world. It's, at the end of the day, it's bad for trade. It's even bad for the United States. It's lose, lose, lose every way you look at it.
All right, Alexander Peter, Jorg said Sri Lanka. If you guys can say a couple of quick comments about what happened in Sri Lanka, the horrible events that took place there, and then we'll move it on to a couple more super chats, and we'll finish out this live show.
Well, I mean, what can you say? I mean, on Easter Sunday for Christians, okay, that this is, it just leaves you speechless. Okay, I don't know a lot about Sri Lankan politics. I'll be really honest with you. Okay. But I mean, in the wake of the Notre Dame fire, and then we have this here, and I will say it, and a lot of people won't say it, but it's a war on Christianity. It's a war on Western civilization, okay? And Western elites have to start waking up to that. Stop hating your own culture. Stop destroying your own history. Start recognizing the identity of your people and what they believe in. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. There'll be a lot more people on your side than you think. Get out of this postmodernist bubble. And have a transcendent moment. I know that's not popular to say, but it does exist. And people do react to those type of things. I mean, I already said in our podcast, I wept watching Notre Dame burn, because it hit me on so many different levels and hard. And then seeing Christian followers, worshipers, killed in their own house of worship, we have to recognize this scourge, okay? And your political correctness only makes it worse, okay? Radical Islamic jihadists, I mean, that's real. I don't care if people attack me for using that term, but it's real. We saw it in Sri Lanka, okay? We see it in so many different places. And it's time for the quote-unquote moderates, which I hate, but it's up to the Muslim world to get their act together too on this here. They have to rein these people in, okay? They have to say that they have nothing to do with this type of thing. And the Saudis, this funding, these madrasas all over the world, billions and billions of dollars of teaching this hateful ideology. It's not religion, it's an ideology, and it has to be smothered.
Alexander.
I was utterly horrified by it. I was totally shocked. And can I just say, the first I learnt about it was yesterday when I went with my wife. My wife is an Anglican, and she was celebrating Easter in church, and she was taking communion. And while she was taking communion, I checked the news on my phone and my mobile phone, and there it was. And I learnt about it whilst I was in church. And I was utterly shocked. And my sympathies are wholly with those poor people in Sri Lanka who were murdered in this gruesome way. And I have to say something else now, which is coming directly to the point that Peter made, which is that just before we started this program, I checked out Zero Hedge, as I often do, and I found this extraordinary article there, which has all of the tweets by Hillary Clinton and by Barack Obama and by all sorts of other Democratic Party worthies. And of course, it makes the point that they all struggle to find ways of avoiding the use of the word Christian. So they talk about the words worshippers, visitors to churches. They come up with all these extraordinary euphemisms to avoid use of the word Christian, or to say quite obviously what this is, which is an attack on Christianity. Now, I know lots of people who are Muslims. I know that most of them will be horrified by this. I know that many, many Muslim people, in fact, when I say many, I mean, I'm almost ashamed of myself to be talking in that way. I mean, Muslims are not people who are antagonistic to people of other faiths, except for this extremely dangerous, very fanatical, very violent, sectarian group of people who receive so much support from so many people, not just from the Saudis. And what these people are is not just Muslims, they are very anti-Christian. They target Christians. They target Shia Muslims. They target Buddhists as well, apparently in Sri Lanka.
They target everybody.
They target absolutely everybody. But if they target Christians, as they did on this occasion, we should be straightforward and say so. What is this embarrassment people have about admitting to the fact that is so obvious? It's an outrage to me, and it was deeply offensive to me to read that article on Zero Hedge and to see the text of all those tweets.
All right, a couple more super chats and we'll close it out. From Terry Saunders, all will be okay. Pinocchio, sorry, Pompeo. We'll sort it out. Okay, that's a good super chat. From American Rebel, $10 super chat. Thank you very much. And from John, a super chat. AOC is a couple of nights short of a round table. Okay.
Fair enough.
And let's close it out with this last super chat, which is a good one for both of you guys. I'm just going to leave the floor open. From 737 Tech. Why is Russia a poor country? Are they still healing from their hard history, or is it something else? Peter Alexander, take it away.
Russia is a very rich country.
I was going to say that.
Maybe we're not defining what rich means. I was actually telling a friend of mine over lunch yesterday is that Russia today, Russia in the present, is richer now and more free than it's ever been in its history. It's a remarkable journey. Recovering from the Soviet experience, yeah. I mean, it's what people are recovering from is from the 1990s, not the Soviet Union. Okay, there are plenty of people that have wonderful things to say about the Soviet Union in Russia today. Okay, and it's absolutely true. Okay, for many people, it was a time of stability, of education, of progress, generational progress. And then the 1990s was just the crucifixion of Russia, if I could use a religious metaphor. I live here. I've been here for 20 years. It's a very, very rich country and a very rich people and a rich culture. It's got a lot of things going for it. And that's why it's sustainable, even during the worst of times.
Peter's absolutely right. I mean, if you go to Russia today, it is very rich, materially very rich, and very modern. And that was something, by the way, that the football fans from Britain, who of course read all the nonsense that's written about Russia in their newspapers, when they went to Russia for the World Cup last year, and they didn't just go to Moscow, of course, they went all around and saw all these various cities. This was the great shock to them. it was this profound surprise to come to a modern, well-run, very advanced, very wealthy country. It has its poor places, it has its poor people, it has all sorts of problems which are still being sorted out. And having said that, the progress has been very remarkable in the last 27 years. And I'm going to say something, in my opinion, we've now left behind both the 1990s and the Soviet period so much in material terms that the problems are more psychological now than material, in the sense that I think that there is still amongst a lot of Russians a great sense that, you know, we've achieved a stability which we don't want to put at risk by experimenting politically with any things. And that perhaps does sort of explain some things like why the political system isn't evolving as healthily as the rest of society would. But I mean, you know, in material terms, please put aside the idea that Russia is anything other but a very rich country. You know, something Westerners don't understand and what they get wrong.
You know, Alex Christoforou, I send you these pictures for our Instagram page, and it's always the Kurskaya metro where they have this free open space for amateur musicians to play.
I remember it, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely wonderful. I see it almost every single day. And the comments that I've gotten, and it's almost uniform, it's so clean. And yes, the whole thing is spotlessly clean, okay?
Oh, yeah.
There's no graffiti inside. And you know why? Why is there no graffiti? Because there's a respect for it. If anyone saw you defiling the Moscow underground system, the police wouldn't arrest you. Citizens would. They would take you and forcefully bring you to the police and tell the police what you had done, because there is a reverence, because it is artistically, it is extraordinary, efficiently, it's efficient. It is it's so much part of our lives here, and people care for it. And people have all their kinds of differences and different personalities and all this, but there's certain things that keep a society together. And that is part of the heritage of Moscow, and it is deeply revered and respected. Now, you might get a little annoyed when it's rush hour. I understand that, okay? But it's a structure. Alexander Christoforou, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, I know. The metro is incredible, and I agree with you. People, you know, they look after not only the metro, Peter, all the historical and cultural monuments of Moscow and Russia. I mean, you can see that there is a true appreciation for the culture and the history, and that's important, especially in today's world.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Jonathan says, "Cheers, guys! It's always a pleasure. Russia has a rich culture and a boatload of gold." On that note, we will end this live stream number 35, the Duran live chat number 35. Thank you, everybody. We hope everyone had a good Easter yesterday, the people that were celebrating Easter as well. Yeah. And we wish everyone a good Easter in the Orthodox faith as well, which is this Sunday coming. Yeah. So thank you, Dean, for your last-minute super chat as well. Thank you. Guys, we hope you have a really, really good day and a good week ahead. Peter, what are you looking at this Easter week, this Orthodox Easter week?
Tomorrow, Crosstalk, our recording will be on Ukraine. And I'm thinking, like I said during our chat, I'm watching things in Libya. We may do that on Thursday to be aired on Friday, but still up in the air. But Ukraine, for sure, it'll be on Wednesday.
That'll be a good show. That'll be a very good show. Alexander, what are you looking at this week?
Ukraine, certainly, because, of course, we've now got to see what kind of
what
steps,
now?
What now with Mr. Zelensky? And I shudder to think. But anyway, whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be interesting or entertaining, if nothing else. I think we've also got to keep an eye on the backwash in the United States after the Mueller report. I mean, this gigantic mountain that produced not a mouse, but frankly, nothing. I mean, a zero. But having said that, I mean, the Democrats are and the media in the United States is spinning furiously to try to make it seem as if there was something there. And they may talk themselves, as we were talking a bit earlier in the program, into doing something stupid, quite likely, in my opinion. And then, of course, closer to home, there's Brexit, which is now, as I said, it's this ongoing drama. But as I said, there's the Conservative Party is now panicking, and that is becoming increasingly clear, by the way. And by the way, so is the Labour Party. And there have been some very interesting articles appearing in places like The Guardian, lots of hand-wringing about the rise of the Brexit Party and of Nigel Farage from people who should have known better and predicted it and should have realised that their own actions were setting the scene for it. But there we are. And last but not least, I'm going to say something, France, because there was a bad reaction in France amongst a lot of people to the way in which money was immediately found to restore Notre Dame. Now, this is not because people don't want to see Notre Dame restored. Of course they do. But they've been told about how difficult it is for the French government to find money to do things. And suddenly, for Notre Dame, money is there, but it turns out it isn't for local people, for ordinary people. And as I understand it, the Gilets jaunes protests were actually bigger this weekend, the one that's just passed.
They were pretty violent too, huh?
No, they were pretty violent too.
Well,
so,
on whose side?
So that's,
Okay.
well, indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, indeed. Well, that's the other thing, because I said my wife was in Paris, and she met with many people there, including lots of academics, who are hostile to the Gilets jaunes. And they all said to her, this is not this weekend, but the previous weekend, that the violence, most of the violence is coming from the police. And I mean, unequivocally so, in fact. And that this is, in fact, starting to affect people's attitudes to the protests and to Macron. So anyway, the Gilets jaunes thing is not over. It continues despite everything Macron is throwing at it. And I think we need to keep an eye on it too.
Okay, great. That will conclude our live. Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow, thank you very much. Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran, thank you as well. Everybody, thank you for joining us. Have a good Pascha. Have a good week ahead. Take care.